Table Talk. This is a roundtable format discussion where I and my guests try to cover 3 tabletop role-playing related topics in 15 minutes. If you know anything about tabletop role players, then you'll know that this is an ambitious goal. Let's head to the table. Welcome back to our Table Talk podcast. I'm your host, Clayton TheGameSmith, and joining me are...
I'm Franklin.
I'm Cheryl.
I'm Clark.
Let's head to the table.
The views and opinions of the panel are their own and do not reflect the views and opinions of any other individual company or organization. This podcast has been known to be opinionated. You have been warned.
Welcome back to another podcast, and today we're going to be talking about alignment. Franklin?
So alignment is a way to represent your character's moral and ethical personality with a very simple 2-letter description. I think anyone who's played any D&D based game, be it D&D or Pathfinder, has a pretty consistent idea about what alignment means. You've all seen the 9 alignment charts in a wide variety of situations. I imagine we have some thoughts on how to implement alignment in your game and common pitfalls and similar things.
As a GM, I find that I have to use alignment in a number of ways, particularly when dealing with classes that are using alignment, like paladins and clerics. That becomes a very important feature, but I also think that it's a vastly underutilized feature in the game because there's just simply not enough game mechanics that incorporate its use.
Yes, pretty much the only game mechanics are the monsters that are inherently evil or inherently good.
Yeah. Realistically coming into play with things like damage reduction on demons, angels, so on and so on.
And things like auras, the ability of spells to affect certain creatures or repel certain creatures.
And basically the only classes that really have an alignment restriction are your clerics, your paladins, and in first edition, your monks.
Which first edition are we talking about?
Pathfinder. First edition Pathfinder.
Wasn't actually aware that second edition removed the lawful restriction on monk.
They did, but getting into a discussion on the differences between
that's a side issue.
Pathfinder's editions is another podcast.
I think alignment's been a fundamental part of the game from the very beginning, and a lot of people find it easy to grasp the concept of good and evil because it pervades all of our fantasy and science fiction and stories and whatnot, as well as law and chaos are easy concepts to define. I think some of the ambiguity comes from, like, how would you distinguish someone that is lawful neutral as compared to somebody who would be acting as neutral good? Like, when you're trying defining specifics, it starts to break down because you're trying to take all of human nature and put it into nine boxes, and people are much more complicated than that to their motivations and actions. And
I definitely agree with that sentiment, that you have to approach alignment from the perspective of it is a vast simplification. So you're not looking to come up with the one be-all and end-all answer. You look at the 9 boxes and you put your character in the one that fits the best. But every character will have those weird cases, that 1 or 2 odd behaviors that fit outside their alignment, or you look at something from a different perspective and it changes that character's alignment. There will always be subtlety, there will always be complexity, and you should embrace that as a character. Alignment exists. You're really just looking, in my opinion, for the best fit.
And I find really only the D&D and their subsequent children that have grown out of those that use alignment. When I have played other game systems that have absolutely no alignment system whatsoever, it makes zero difference at the game table. There's not enough of a mechanical impact from alignment for me to regard it as an important game mechanic.
Yeah, and this is true. Outside of a handful of clerical spells, there are very few things that really affect a character based on their alignment.
Yeah, and the same thing with like paladins, and if I'm casting a spell like protection from evil, then I have to look to see if the monster can get through that or not. Or if you're using a smite, for example, a creature has to be in evil alignment, something like that. Without diving into the moral complexity of what really alignment is supposed to represent, and as Clark mentioned earlier, looking at the insane diversity of the human moral condition and putting it in 9 boxes is folly, let alone when you consider the multiverse of a role-playing game universe like Pathfinder, where you're looking at, why does a god have an alignment? Why does Cthulhu have an alignment? Why does an ant have an alignment? It's an ant, it just does what an ant does. So it becomes an unnecessary mechanic, with the exception of those very, very small things.
As children, we see things a lot black and white.
Just for all of our listeners, in case you're wondering, Cheryl is not a child.
I am not. I try to be.
Her inner child, just to clarify.
So as we grow older, that concept of good versus evil, as black and white, and no grays in between, changes. So now as adults, we're looking at this system and we're saying it's hard to do alignment, right? Because there's gray. What I find interesting about alignment, and is still useful, is in guiding your character's actions. And that's just it. It's just a guide.
And I see that in almost every edition of the game, from its earliest roots to its newest editions that are out now. They always stress the fact that it is a guideline. Mm-hmm. No one expects you, just like in real life, no one expects your character is going to act within a stringent parameter of moral code.
Well, 3 of us around this table played as children this game.
Yes.
First edition.
Clayton, I think, was the youngest.
10.
At 10. Mm-hmm. I was a little older. Franklin, on the other hand, came into this hobby as pretty much an adult for views on black and white.
Yeah, mid-teens.
Right? So he's already got his ideas. Well, when we were playing as children, it was easier to say, the orcs are evil.
Yeah.
Right? And,
yes,
attacking the orcs is not an evil...
It's not an evil act because they're evil.
Exactly. Right? Yes. But as we got older, we start questioning that.
Yes. When you start examining things through the lens of morality is always determined by the viewer.
Yes.
And so, the orcs, when the adventurers come into their village and start slaughtering them, regard the adventurers as pure evil.
And I think that's a really good distinction.
All we're doing is sitting here, we're farming, we're raising our children, we're going to school. Hey, leave us alone. But because those crazy humans, we need to go after them because they're evil.
Mm-hmm. And through the lens of a child's innocence, the world is very much black or white, good or evil, orderly or chaotic. And that's pretty much the extent of things. It's really not until your later years that you start to see the world as a bigger spectrum of gray.
And I think a couple of points to jump in here. First and foremost, I definitely agree with the spectrum, and my view of alignment is very much that it's not, the 9 boxes definitely have a lot of wiggle room and a lot of fuzzy borders between them. You could make very strong arguments that, for example, you have a lawful good character. Well, they could be a lot closer to the lawful border and just barely over the good line, or they could be really close to being neutral good and right on that barrier. Alignment certainly isn't a thing that needs to stay static for your character through their entire career. Some really interesting stories that have been played through at tables that I've sat at or run have been players changing their alignment. The redeemed villain, the hero that falls to evil, someone who goes from maybe, it's not a story that's played as much, but someone who does the lawful to chaotic shift or vice versa could be a really interesting story. Someone who used to be a freebooting rebel type who learns to live in a regimented, structured society is potentially an interesting story to play through. And that is going to be a very gradual process. The second thing is, we've talked about having your alignment informing your character, and I definitely agree with that. The Pathfinder core rulebook actually specifically says that alignment is a guideline, not a straitjacket.
Yes, yeah.
So you don't need to be completely restricted to your alignment. But I'd almost even turn that on its head. When I'm creating a character, I don't start by thinking, what alignment is this character, and then how do they act based on that? I think, who is this character? And I come, and sometimes even, if I'm playing someone who isn't a divine spellcaster, who their alignment doesn't really matter mechanically, sometimes it'll be three or four sessions, sometimes even a level or two in before I actually put an alignment on my sheet. Because I play the character for a while, and once I get to know them, then I decide what alignment they are.
Yes. Now, the very few mechanical things that have survived, as we've touched on earlier, the mechanical things do run into this problem of interpretation on what is good, what is evil, what is lawful, what is chaotic. One of the big holdovers for a lot of people that began playing D&D in the 70s and the 80s is the paladin and lawful good,
Yeah.
often referred to as lawful stupid,
Yeah.
because everyone had a so narrow view on what that lawful good was.
And what it represented, that straitjacket.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to the paladin. Now, I feel that one of the great things that Pathfinder 2nd Edition is moving into is the anthema for the gods, and for the... There's anthema and...
Is this in reference to...
Edicts.
Oh, yes.
Okay?
Okay.
If your god has an anthema and an edict, what is important to that god comes in there, not in alignment anymore.
To be fair, I think you can still commit such transgressions that your alignment actually shifts outside the realm
Yes.
of acceptable worship for your god, and you could lose your powers that way.
Yes.
But there are much more direct... Shaylin, for example, spells out destruction of artwork is a really, really bad... It's an evil act if you're a Shaylinite, but may not be if you're a member of a different faith.
Of the same alignment. Right? So I think that is a really good step forward.
Actually, I like that distinction.
Yeah, going out and spelling out in more detail exactly how the gods interpret their alignments in 2nd edition, I think, was a very good innovation, and one that's really easy to port to other systems, because you'd argue that a lot of, we already do it in other systems.
Yeah.
If you're playing a Pharasman in 1st edition, just because it doesn't write anywhere that, creating undead is a bad thing for Pharasmans, everyone who has read any write-up on the religion knows that and will avoid those actions.
I think that without going into different interpretations from different rule sets, my fundamental issue with alignment is that it ultimately really has no mechanical benefit to the game. It's a fluff thing that really only matters for about 5 to 10% of the game.
Yes, and this is what I was saying about the edicts and the anthema. There is another set for dealing with your clerics and your paladins, right?
Yeah, and rather than... It's a rule set that only applies to the classes that it matters for, as opposed to alignment, which is a rule set that only really matters for divine casters, but everyone has to deal with at some level.
Yeah, and I guess my issue is that for something that every character is supposed to have, that for something that's supposed to be so ubiquitous in the game, that the mechanic really only matters to 2, perhaps 3 classes, and otherwise it has no functional use in the game.
Yes.
That's the part that bothers me about it.
And if you look at the history of D&D from first going through, it's become less and less.
I was actually going to mention that, because
Yeah.
I've noticed from it having such a huge part of, like, say, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and even into 2nd edition to where it is now, there's definitely been way less emphasis, and even mechanically, aside from, like, damage reduction and special mechanical circumstances, it's showing up less and less in the game as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, you're looking at the games, any of the fantasy games in the D&D family, as Franklin noticed earlier, you're really only looking at your outsiders that are really...
Following their alignment.
Yeah. And where it matters when you're throwing up, protection from evil and stuff like that.
It is worth mentioning, actually, that in Pathfinder Unchained, there is a variant rule set that removes alignment for all creatures except for outsiders. Says that angels, demons, so that they can embody pure, primordial, conceptual good or evil. Humans are too complex to do that, and so don't have an alignment.
And not just humans. Like, I mean, we are talking a fantasy game. So you got your elves,
any of the mortal races, your humans, your elves,
Yeah.
dwarves, whatever. There are trends, Pathfinder specifically talks about dwarves trending much more lawful, elves generally are more chaotic. Although, it's interesting that most fantasy settings I've read will portray the dwarves as a very lawful society. Where the elves sit on that gamut from law to chaos really varies a lot, setting to setting.
Mm-hmm.
Galarian elves are quite chaotic by nature, but if you look, for example, to Eberron and the Aranel, they're a very structured, very regimented society and are generally lawful.
Yeah, it's much more loosely defined now. They'll say things like, say, elves tend towards this type of alignment. It doesn't define it in rigid parameters that you must be of this certain alignment or code. It says that the majority lean towards this and leaves it up to the player as to how.
I'm interested in if anyone at this table has ever looked at their character alignment and said, I must play my character this way as a result of my alignment.
I have done that, but I will make the caveat that I had a specific idea of how my character acts, and therefore he really, or she really, fits on that spectrum. So I was using that as a guideline to keep myself as the character in the direction that I wanted that character to go. But usually I do what Franklin does. I'll play my character for a while and then put my alignment on it. Because, this character sort of went, neutral good.
Right.
Not so much anything on the law or the chaos. It depends.
I have to confess, I kind of hold on to an old school ideal where you just didn't play evil characters because it was counterproductive to the whole teamwork of being in a party with mutual goals and trying to promote common good and whatnot. So we really were restricting ourselves to 3 different types of good alignment. So it really wasn't hard. You had your lawful, you had your more chaotic-y elves, and you had ones that were more neutral ground. But not playing evil characters, it made it a lot easier to define that.
Yeah.
I think only recently I've struggled between, is this really a neutral good thing or a lawful neutral thing? And, and that ambiguity, it's mostly just for flavor, because you're going to play your character way outside those 9 boxes, like you said, right?
Yeah, and I think we've jumped right into, we talked a little bit about the lawful stupid, the stereotypes of alignments, but I think we are jumping into what will probably have to be a conversation for another time of, the common traps of different alignments, and evil characters as PCs is an excellent place to go with that conversation. Because I, for one, have played in evil campaigns before and had a lot of fun with it, where everyone plays a villain, but you have to be very careful about how you approach that.
I would definitely like to go into evil characters as a topic, but we're not going to have time to get into any depth on that. So we'll leave that to the next podcast.
And until next time,
We'll see you at the table.